As you know, at Local Football Flavor, we interview local fans to find out what's really going on with their teams. But one of the other things we want to do is make everyone more knowledgeable about football in general. So, in today's episode, we're going to discuss some very specific things about football that will help you be better at whether you're playing a simulation of it, Madden, or any other video game that's accurate, or you're just watching the game and you want to see how do teams create mismatches, both on offense and on defense. This is going to be an entire series we're going to be debuting with the strategies of football. Again, it will be directly applicable to anyone who wants to win more in Madden, anyone who wants to watch their team good, and anyone who wants to correctly evaluate whether or not their coach is doing things well from drawing up perspective. So we hope that you enjoy this series. Without further ado, here is the strategies of football. Well, to have an effective strategy, we need to have a starting point. In the NFL, the starting point is the snap. So let's start with how to read the offense and the defense pre-snap. So yeah, for pre-snap reads, what we first need to know is what is different from the baseline so we can try to figure out what the defense or the offense is doing. So we're going to start with what's called a balanced front to teach what the baseline is. A balanced front is whenever you have the same amount of eligible receivers on both sides of the ball. So in this situation, you can clearly see that there are two receivers on the left, a tight end, and a wide receiver on the right. Therefore, same on each side, balanced formation. So when this is the case, the defense will typically establish itself in such a way where it identifies the biggest concern. That's going to be its base concern, so you'll know where to start with. So in the example I drew it up here, I have the free safety right here. Instead of being in the traditional center of the field cover one location, cheated over to the left, as well as the strong safety being over to the right. Now, pre-snap reads are going to indicate one of two things. If you're on offense and you're trying to figure out what the defense is, you always start with the safeties. And the reason for that is what kind of coverage are they going to go into? The safeties are normally the first ones to tip that off. So in general, there are four types of cover: 1, 2, 3, and 4. Cover 1, and you watch all this in the basics of football if you haven't already. But as a quick refresher, cover 1 is 1 high safety, cover 2 would be 2 high safeties, and cover 3 would be 3 high defenders, and cover 4 is 4 high defenders. The number is how many people are high. So as we look at this first set as is drawn here, it's drawn as a traditional cover 2 shell. 2 guys look like they're tight with the 2 outside corners being pressed on the wide receivers. So the reason this is important is that in a cover 2, there's essentially 2 directions that the defense can go. Either A, cover 2 man, which would be this safety right here just has all of this space. The free safety on the left has all of this space. So those two are essentially out of play. And then you just see man coverage for every other eligible on the field with their corresponding persons. Here's an example of what cover 2 zone looks like pre-snap. You're able to see that you have the 2 high safeties standing across the 40-yard line and essentially the mid-tier of defenders relatively around the 30 and relatively square to the person across from them who they would be covering. Now, what makes this a little bit unique is Buffalo's formation having the 2 stacked players right here creates a little bit more of a different look. But these 2 linebackers are still responsible for their zone running responsibilities so that if anyone comes through, you are able to have it. But in the pass plays, we're going to see as this ball gets snapped, everyone settles back into their zones in preparation of making the play. Problem with this particular day was the Rams were just slow. So then it comes down to my pre-film discovery of what do I have matchup advantages with. In the NFL, there's 2 main areas people have advantages, and that tends to be linebacker tight end matchups. Most tight ends in the NFL are just flat out bigger than the linebackers, typically stronger than their linebacker, and speed is relatively slow compared to the receivers anyway, so it's not really that big of a deal. So in areas of the field where speed is less important, like in the red zone, your tight ends become much bigger threats, and this is why you see people like Gronkowski be able to dominate the league forever because there's no linebacker on the planet who's going to be able to cover them, and that's true for most tight ends. So what you would do is you would say, okay, what are my advantages that my personnel have versus theirs? So if I know I have a stud tight end, I want them to play man coverage all day. And then I want to have my tight end do routes that come before the cover two window begins. So we're talking about little down and outs, slants in, stuff of that nature, so that way that your tight end has an advantage. Now, the other area that can be an advantage other than your tight end is your slot receiver, depending upon how the slot corner is. Basically, there are two different varieties of slot corner currently going in the NFL. There is the short, quick guy and the big, lumbering, almost linebacker slash safety combo called a big nickel. And depending upon what kind of receiver you have, there are inherent advantages or disadvantages against that. So if you have yourself a big, tall, strong tight end or a wide receiver slot, it's going to have an advantage over a short, quick guy if we're trying to do physical routes, such as coming up, pushing, and doing a corner, an out, or an in. Again, you see all of these are essentially trying to keep the safety out of the play to keep your one-on-one advantage matchup alive there. And this is all just from one pre-snap read of cover two. Now, it doesn't have to be cover two man. The other thing that this shell shows is it could be cover two zone. So essentially how that looks, there's millions of ways to do the underneath portion of cover two zone, but essentially the thing is divide the field across in 5 bubbles, all underneath the tight end or the top coverage, and each person is giving one zone. So a defense would want to do this if you're battling against a lot of condensed parts of the field, like the red zone. If you're dealing with an area where the opposing team doesn't really have a threat of running over the top, there's no super fast receiver, and most of the offense is running underneath plays, that's where you want to have these zones that cover all the underneath, because you try to do a slant into this, a basic slant concepts, there's nowhere for it to go. The only way an offense really beats cover two zone is you have to push it over the top. So that's where you have just a streak here. You try to catch it in here, which is known as the hole of cover two, right on the sideline. That's why you see so many passes in the NFL thrown to the sidelines, because there's an inherent window from this strong or free safety running to the side while he still has to cover over the top. So a way people can make this difficult is if you run a straight vertical or a fly route, and then you attack the center with your slot. Now, this free safety has to make a choice. Am I covering the left side or the right side? One of the corners should be taught to follow them. So now, instead of it being a zone coverage by this corner, he effectively becomes blanket man. Same here. But that also means they're vacating a zone. So there'd be a possibility of a running back flare route. So that's all just generic how you could get around a cover two look before we start. So the drawbacks of any deep pass inherently comes down to how do we block? Because if you have a defensive front that requires more than 5 blockers to stop, you're going to have trouble all day. So this is really where modern defenses in the NFL are trying to overpower the offenses. We make a defensive end that's so good that he needs 2 players to cover him. And if we get a second pass rusher that also requires 2 players to block him, well, now we got a tremendous advantage. So give you an example here. This is TJ Watt coming out, or correction, we'll do Cleveland. This is Garrett coming off the edge and Clowney coming off the edge. Both of them require 2 blockers. So the way that most teams do this is they do the so-called chip with the tight end, where the tight end basically just hits them and then runs out into a route, and then the tackle tries to cut him off. And then on the left, you would just have hopefully your tackle being able to cut him off, but if not, you have help rolling over from the guard. Well, that opens up some natural lanes now, doesn't it? Because now you have a middle linebacker coming, or crushing your nose tackle one on one on your center, which is already an inherent disadvantage because your center has to use one hand to move the ball. He's the only lineman who does that. So he's the hardest position of all of your linemen to get a impact hit. So you see teams such as the Philadelphia Eagles this year invest major draft capital on an up the middle rusher. It's an incredibly valuable thing because if you can have your middle guy take two, you really have offensive advantage. And then you just have a one-on-one with your guard and your other tackle here. Okay, in this particular look, we're going to see what happens when a defense has more power coming through than the line. So we just gave the example of what happens when you have a defensive player who needs two blockers, but they only put one against them. So in the Rams front here, the person who needs two is Aaron Donald. You may have heard about him. He's a superstar of superstars. So what the Rams do in this play is they do a fake out where they make it look like this player from the left is coming in the blitzing. And that's how the Bills' offensive line is going to read this. They think that all five are coming and all five are coming evenly. So what you're going to see here is a failure that leads to Aaron Donald's success. So when the end comes in and fails out, this tackle expects to block him and the guard right here. So they all kind of kick out this way. But when he goes, well, we got two guys blocking one who doesn't need to have two guys blocking him, which then does a cascade effect all the way down the line of scrimmage, leaving, unfortunately, Mr. 71 the responsibility of taking on the monster that is Aaron Donald. And ultimately, at the end of the day, this would be considered a pre-snap failure by the offense due to the fact that Aaron Donald should never be single blocked in pass coverage. Let's snap the ball. You see both of these two kick out right here. Our tight end left. And now we do get a chip from the tackle. But what do we have? We have an outside guy. So the tackle just can't chill and help Aaron Donald. He needs to now engage in who he's responsible for. Since the running back left in a route, there is no backside protector or second guy that could help on Aaron Donald. So we continue the play through. Aaron Donald has now dismantled 71 and now has a clean look at Josh Allen. Josh Allen would like to throw the ball, but Aaron Donald doesn't always let you do what you like. But the point being, that's now where we have the running back has to stay and help somewhere, just do a general whoever comes through type blocking. And now, because our defensive ends particularly require two blockers, now the offense is really playing in a hole where I have essentially three guys going out in the route versus 7 defenders. This is why when you're building a team, edge rushers can be incredibly powerful and vital in how to do that. And that's also something you would know before the snap, because that should be in your basic pregame coverage. How many defender or how many blockers are needed per defender? So we're going to get into very specific details moving forward, but I wanted to just start with some generals, pre-snap reads. Cover 2 is a very common one that you see, especially in simulations like Madden, but it's also common in the league. One that's becoming more common, which will be our next video, is cover 3. And how do we identify cover 3 moving forward? Be a team player. Click like and subscribe. Also, let us know what content you want to have. Send us a comment. Apply to be interviewed. We're always ready to have more guests.